show yourself. Structural racism is about as American as apple pie is to America. It's been instituted in America forever. One pillar of structural racism is called redlining, which was policies implemented in the United States in the 1930s that had everlasting impact on modern day society. The definition of redlining is the implementation of government policy that helped create isolation of minority neighborhoods by withholding capital. This caused minority neighborhoods to not be able to get housing loans. This would have major impacts in mainly wealth and education that people of color have felt for generations, as well as to modern day. In this speech, I'm going to go over the impacts that redlining had on education and wealth, and finally why it is important to us and what can we do to stop this. The very first aspect that redlining had was massive impact on wealth. According to Forbes, real estate is the best way to build wealth due to it being an appreciated asset. What this means is that because housing loans are forced equity, it forces you to pay into them monthly, and they appreciate well. Wealth is like kind of an automatic, real estate is an automatic way to build wealth. But redlining would have an impact on this because redlining made that banks would not give out housing loans to people of color, which would not allow them to be able to buy the house. And if you can't buy the house, you can't enter the real estate market. So basically, you don't have a seat at the table for an excellent way, or as Forbes said, the best way to build wealth, which is super unfair and would prevent communities of color from building wealth. Also, according to the University of Washington, the United States government supported investments into white neighborhoods. So this, even if you were a person of color and you were able to buy a house, your house would not appreciate in value as high as white neighborhoods because the United States government chose that white people would be the winners and they invested money into those neighborhoods and they did not invest into communities of color. This would have an impact inadvertently on education. Education in America is paid for by our housing tax dollars. So if you're in a white community that has investments that appreciate in value, that have these really expensive houses with expensive taxes, their local schools are going to have much more resources than a community of color. And according to a study, students of color receive $23 billion less a year for education than students of white students, which is insane, of a huge gap disparity that we need to bridge in America. Secondly, according to Brookings, schools with the highest minority enrollment, for example, students have less than a 50% chance of getting a math or science teacher with a license or a degree in that field. And this goes back to if you had $23 billion less, you have less resources to give to your students. And this inadvertently has an impact on their education because they can't get as good as an education because they don't have the resources to get an education. And in America, we know that in math and science, these STEM fields are where all of the huge high incomers are. So if you don't get a good education, and then in math or science, and you can't get that high paying income job, even if redlining policies are removed, then you can't afford to be able to buy a house because of the market. And I'm going to show you guys a thing based off of racism, the structural racism at a glance at education. And it's a 3-layered aspect. So we can go here, the housing. Housing discrimination causes residence and segregation and unequal educational opportunity. This leads to an education disparity. Schools influence employees and career prospects, which this prospect or income disparity leads to the housing impacts, employee impact income and access to housing. As we can see, this is a 3-layer issue. And I'll sum it up. People cannot get a house. If you can't get a house, then your education is going to suffer as a community. If your education suffers, then you don't have access to those degrees or employee benefit, like knowing other employees to get in those high-income paying jobs. You can't get the high-income jobs, you're never going to be able to most likely afford a house. Do you see how this issue is a big old can of worms that needs to be fixed? So that leads me to my third body paragraph. What can we do and why this matters? Well, I think we understand the why this matters, but we'll get to it. But what can we do? Well, the first thing we can do is we can get rid of the way, or restructure the way that we pay for education in America. Right now it's based on property tax. What we really should do is pull all the property taxes together and divide it up equally, either by state or the federal level. We can decide that, but that's how we fix that. Another thing we can do is we can make sure that the U.S. government incentivizes investments into communities of color to bring up these communities to their full potential that we should have done a long time ago. And another thing we can make sure is that people that do get caught for redlining, that the punishment meets the crime, that these people are punished to the extent of the law, and maybe we need to put new laws to make sure that the punishment is so severe that no one will do redlining. And why it matters? Well, according to Anthony DiCanola at the University of Arkansas, diversity in the workplace equals 2 to 3 times more money in the pockets of the executives. And he worked with Google, and they found through studies that the more diverse a workplace is, the better it is, and the more money can be made. And in the end, only everybody cares about is money, and money talks. So basically, if we have more diversity, more people of color in the workplace becomes a better environment and a more profitable environment. In conclusion, in the 1930s, the policies that the United States government implemented called redlining had immense harmful policies on wealth and education for people of color and caused a lot of problems that we still feel today. We need to fix these problems, starting with education, with fixing how we pay for education, so that all people of all races can go to their full potential. And imagine if America was operating with 360 million people at their full potential. America would become even greater, and we might be able to even see another economic boom. This is why redlining is so harmful, because it puts down people of color, which are United States citizens. We are preventing them from reaching their full potential. And that is why we need to change this and why it matters so much. Thank you so much.